Hello everybody and welcome back to another 2022 Overwatch League roster breakdown video. Today we're taking a look at the 2022 roster for the Philadelphia Fusion. Very interesting team. Obviously last season there was a ton of kind of turmoil and chaos with this team. Unable to get to the APAC region for a lot of their players throughout the season. Trying to be this Western mixed roster, or mixed Western and Korean roster, with players like Poco and Funny Astro, and Shockwave and EQO, just really unable to get to Korea during the season. So it was just kind of this issue they ran into throughout the season. And then, of course, this offseason, losing Alarm, who passed away back in November. This is a team that has really been through the ringer over the past year. A lot of very big changes for this team, and a lot of just kind of chaotic things. Still managed to make the playoffs last season despite that rough patch with visa issues. Though they didn't really find much success once they got there, they did manage to get to that point. This season they're definitely looking to rebuild and have a very strong roster looking to push into the playoffs. So let's take a look at the team that they have put together so far. So you can see they have in the DPS line, they have Carpe returning, they have MN3, and they have Zest. Those are their DPS players. Two rookies in the DPS line, and then Carpe. Then they have on the tank role, they have Fury. Of course, he was with this team back in 2020, went to the Justice for a year, and is now returning to the Fusion for 2022. And then their support line, they have Aim God and Fixa. Fixa is currently underage, so he is not going to be playing right at the beginning of the season. His birthday's in early May, so he'll be there for most of the season. They just want to have him for the very first week or two, possibly. I'm sure they'll sign some more players. I don't think this roster is complete. I think they need another support player, potentially for the beginning of the season. Unless they want to play one of their DPS players on that role, I guess. And I think they're going to sign another tank player, but we'll talk about who those people might be when we get in there. They also made some changes to their coaching staff, moving on from their previous head coach, who, for whatever reason, I'm drawing a blank on his name, even though he's obviously really good and is with the San Francisco Shock again. For whatever reason, I can't remember his name. But they were moving on from their previous head coach, which was 9K. That's who it is. 9K. They also had KDG before that. So they've had a bit of a big turnaround on head coaches over the past few years. But this year they are having a coaching staff led by Jin, who formerly coached the Guangzhou Charge and T1. He coached the Guangzhou Charge from 2018 to 2020. So he coached them when they had that successful run in the Summer Showdown back in 2020. And also on their coaching staff is Chara, who is the former Guangzhou Charge player, went on to coach T1 alongside Jin, and is now with the Philadelphia Fusion. So obviously a player that Jin trusted enough to become a coach. So interesting coaching staff. I'm a fan of them. Of course, they lost 9K, went back to the Shock. Christopher left to go to the London Spitfire. They lost Moby Dick. He went to the Toronto Defiant. So a lot of big changes to this team's coaching staff in the past year, and changes to their roster. But let's jump in and let's talk about their new players, and even the old players they have. Talk about this roster as it is going into 2022. So, of course, the first player up is Carpe. He is the Philadelphia Fusion. They have built around him for years. He is still a star DPS player, still a very, very good DPS player. I think it's very interesting that of all the roles that we have seen so far in the Overwatch League, DPS seems to be the one that has players that have the most longevity. It's the one where players seem to last the longest of all of them. I think if I had to guess, it's probably just because a lot of those players are more kind of mechanically gifted already. They kind of start off very mechanically talented, and so there's always going to be really good players, but I think so many of them are just that super talented that it's very hard for them to get replaced. But I do think they're a very, very good DPS line with Carpe leading the way. Of course, known most for his hit scan. Plays some Tracer as well, but he's mostly known for his Cassidy, his Widow, and his Ashe. That's where he really kind of has made his name. They also have another hit scan player on this roster, which is MN3. Another person who's going to play a lot of that Widow, Ashe, and Cassidy. I expect MN3 to play mostly in those double hit scan metas. That is where I would expect his primary play to come from. And then Zest is going to be their flex DPS player. He plays the Genji, the Pharah, the Doomfist, the Echo, stuff like that. He also does play a little bit of Tracer. Now, I'm not super familiar with Zest or MN3. I did not watch a lot of their contenders matches. But what I'm curious to see with this team is who is their Tracer player for the majority of the season. Now, historically, they have played a lot of Carpe on Tracer. I've never really thought Carpe was an incredible Tracer. It's something that I tend to think he has just kind of been somewhat average when compared to a lot of the other Tracers in the league. So I'm curious to see if that is something that they want Zest to do on this roster, if they want him to be the primary Tracer player, or if they're going to roll with Carpe. If we see a lot of double hit scan metas, we might be seeing, Tracer Ashe, Tracer Widow, Tracer Cassidy, and would they rather have Carpe on that role in case they need to, switch over to something like Hanzo Widow or something like that. That's one of my biggest things with this roster. It's much like the Dallas Fuel were last season. I don't think it's as big of a glaring issue because we've at least seen multiple seasons worth of Tracer play out of Carpe. We didn't really see that out of Sparkle, XC, or Doha last season. And then XC, of course, didn't play for the team. But that's the main thing I'm kind of looking at, and I'm curious to see where they go with that. Because I trust their hit scan play, of course. I trust their flex DPS play. It's really just that Tracer, which is such an important hero, we don't really see as much of as I think we normally do on a lot of other rosters. So I'm hoping that we just see some really solid Tracer play out of one of their players here. Because other than that, I think there's a really solid DPS lineup that really can play pretty much everything. It's definitely not, in my opinion, an elite one. It's not one of those ones that I look at that I think is among the best in the league. It certainly, I think, has the possibility to do that, but I don't think it is looking to be the most likely to be an elite level lineup. Where I think this roster will really come together is where they have in their supporting roles in their tanks and their supports. They made a pretty big move by bringing Fury back to this team. I think that is really, to me, where this team looks to be at its all-in state, is by bringing Fury back from the Washington Justice. I still think Fury is one of the best off-tanks in the Overwatch League. I think mechanically he's incredible. I think on the Justice last season, yeah, he still made the playoffs, but they didn't look like the best team. I don't necessarily think that was on Fury. I think that was just kind of the team having some very bizarre decision making. But I still think Fury is an elite level off tank. Obviously, he is an off tank, so I do think this team needs to have another tank player on this team. I'd be interested in seeing if they bring Sato back. He is still currently a free agent. They don't have a main tank. Could be a good player just to bring in. He has, of course, a history on this team, so he kind of knows some of the players here, mainly Fury and Carpe. I don't necessarily think that is the best call because I've always found Sato to be one of those players that he wasn't the most reliable at certain times in his career. Definitely got a lot better in 2020 on Fusion. But I'm curious to see if he would still be as good if there was no tank supporting him, right? He had Fury supporting him in 2020. I think that helped his stocks kind of rise. He also had Funny Astro and Alarm supporting him. So how would he be if he didn't have an off tank and he didn't have the same level of support as he did back then. It would be interesting to see, but definitely someone I think they could bring back. The Fusion have a history of bringing back players. They kind of like a lot of their, kind of their guys, the people who they've had in the past. They kind of know the people who they trust and who they think are very good. And I think they just have a general respect for the players that they've built up because they, I think, are a very good team when it comes to scouting. I think they've done a really good job scouting talent, and I just think they understand that they always have good players on their team. So that's really what I'm looking for, because I know Fury's going to be able to play everything on the off-tank role, right? He can play the D.Va, he can play the Hog, Zarya, Sigma. I think he even plays some Wrecking Ball at a decently high level. I wouldn't want him to be my Wrecking Ball player primarily. If you can get somebody who's a bit better, I think that's pretty good. I also trust Fury to be able to pick it up, though, so... I think if there's any off-tank player who could pick up all the main tanks, Fury is probably the one. We've seen him play Orisa in the past as well. I remember him playing Orisa with London in the 2019 playoffs. So I know he can play a little bit of that as well. So I do think Fury has a potential to be able to play everything. I think he is just that good of a player. He is that talented. But I still think they should get a main tank just to be safe, because there's always the possibility that you are going to want someone who's just a stronger Winston and a stronger Reinhardt. But I think Fury is a very good place to start for this tank line, and a player who I'm very excited to see once again on the Fusion playing alongside Carpe. I know the two of them are friends, so it'll be fun to watch them play together once again. Finally, taking a look at the support line, you have Aim God and you have Fixa. Aim God, of course, formerly playing for the Washington Justice, and before that with the Boston Uprising. Decent history in the Overwatch League. Always been a player who I think has been incredibly talented. Not always the best decision-making of all the players in the league, but he's always been very mechanically gifted and a very talented player. And so I think him coming into this Fusion team, obviously coming in to replace Alarm, is very difficult. And so I'm not going to sit here and say that this is going to be just as good or not, right? Alarm is one of the most talented players I've ever seen. One of the best, people I've ever seen in the league from everything I've heard, from teammates and coaches. Alarm was a completely different level of player and person. Aim God is going to do what he can. He's going to fill in as best as he can. It's big shoes to fill, and it's definitely tough shoes to try to fill in. But I do think that Aim God is a very strong player, a very good player, and somebody who has really done a good job in the Overwatch League and has shown to be a very mechanically gifted player several times in his Overwatch League career. And that, to me, is really all you can kind of ask for. Somebody you can trust to come in and make big plays in big moments is really important, right? He was with the Justice in 2020. Well, didn't play in 2021, but he was in contenders on Team CC, so a pretty good team. Someone that knows what it's like to play in the Overwatch League stage. I think you put him in the right team environment. I think the Fusion are a very good team environment. I think Aim God will once again thrive and be a top-level player. You're pairing him with Fixa, who is, of course, a rookie player. Like I said before, not 18 yet. Spent time on T1, spent some time with Uprising Academy, spent some time with WGS Phoenix, and then returning to the Philadelphia Fusion, of course, who are the kind of T1 team, comes back and is now with them going into the 2022 season. So I feel pretty good about this addition. I think that Fixa brings a lot. He's going to be your Lucio. He's going to be your Brig. I'm sure he plays Mercy as well. So you know what you get, and you have a pretty solid support line there. It's somebody who you can trust. I haven't watched a ton of him as well, much like the other guys on the T1 contenders roster. But to me, I'm always interested in seeing rookies, and I always trust people that come out of T1 because I think that the Fusion have had a very good track record of bringing those players up. And a lot of their guys historically have been very, very good because, like I said, I think the Fusion are a very, very good scouting. So I think it's a really good thing to see. I would wonder if they do plan on bringing in another support player. A lot of teams we've seen go with the double flex support route. I think you can get away with getting just one main support, one flex support. I think that's perfectly fine. I just wonder that based solely on the fact that we haven't seen a ton of main support players getting signed. And so double flex support seems to be very prominent. And because Fixa won't be 18 until May 2nd, they may want to have another support player just in case that is what they need. Now, like I said, they have 3 DPS players, so if they really need to for a game or two, roll with a double flex support look with MN3 or Zest playing the support role, then I'm sure they could do it. They could get away with it. But it's not the biggest deal in the world. I don't think you need to make that decision, potentially on saying we're going to do what we need to do for 2. We're going to make a signing for 2 games or 1 game or whatever. And then we're just going to hope that it's not that big a deal. I think you go with what you have, and you if you think this is the route to go where you don't need to sign anybody else, I think that's a perfectly understandable route to go down. I wouldn't be surprised if they brought somebody else in, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's a guarantee. I think they're going to bring in another tank. That I will say I'm absolutely certain of. I think that they will bring in a main tank player. Obviously, main tank isn't a role anymore, it's just tank, but they'll bring in a tank player to play the tank role, or the main tank heroes. But I suppose only time will tell what this Fusion roster is going to be. They're staying in the APAC region for the 2022 season, so they'll be matching up with the Seoul Dynasty again every, tournament cycle, and the Shanghai Dragons once again. So I think they're in a tough spot. I think that is still a good region. I think they look to be one of the better teams in the region, just based on what we've seen so far. I think the region's getting better. I thought last season the APAC region just did not look very good. This season I think they're improving, so I think it'll be a bit difficult for the Fusion, which is part of the reason why I think bringing in another support player might be a good idea. Because they don't have to, but I think it would be good to try to bring somebody in, because you don't want to kind of basically not go for a win early in the season, because those games could end up costing you a lot down the stretch. So I'm very interested to see what this team does. I'm very interested to see the team in action. It's going to be a very different look for the Fusion team. A lot of those longtime players like Poco, EQO are now gone. But I'm excited to see the Fusion in 2022. I've always liked the Fusion, even though I feel like there's a rivalry between the Fusion and the NYXL. I've just always been a really big fan of the Fusion. I really like their kind of mentality, their kind of underdog mentality, the way they build their rosters. I've always been a big fan of Carpe, so I am very excited for this 2022 Fusion roster, and I cannot wait for them to finally get to play in 2022. But let me know your thoughts on this Fusion roster in the comments down below. If you like this roster, don't like this roster, whatever it is, let me know down there. And if you want more videos like this, consider liking and subscribing for more content in the future. That's going to be all for me for today. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.